And I just want to start with a little sort of personal note as a person who founded GetPRDone 2 years ago, co-founded it. We believe in GetPRDone, and I do too, that the votes of all people should count. Tory votes, Labour votes, Lib Dem votes, Plaid Cymru votes, Communist votes, whoever. All votes should count. I personally have another reason why I want to, in fact, get PR done in this country. The sooner the better, and I'm 74 years of age, so I hope it doesn't take too much longer, because I'd like to have the possibility of actually creating a new left party in this country. And I would be a founding charter member. The trouble is that left parties under first past the post go nowhere. Go nowhere. It's a losing game. It's just a waste of time to run elections. You're not going to win the socialist candidates, whatever. And PR does allow the possibility of socialists to have a party that will represent their views in House of Commons. And we're going to get to what's happening in Finland. In Finland, for example, the Left Alliance, and Dan will introduce him in a second, got 8% of the vote in the 2019 election. That means they got 8% of the seats. That's 16 seats in the Finnish parliament go to the Left Alliance. And the Left Alliance is part of the coalition government, all headed by women, by the way, not just incidentally, who run Finland. So we got two great speakers tonight. The first is Danny Dorling. Danny is a professor of geography at Oxford University. He's written a terrific book. I haven't quite finished it. It's called Fintopia, What We Can Learn from the World's Happiest Country. There's a lot more to Finland than sauna baths and Nokia phones. So Danny is going to give us a 10-minute or so warm up on the nature of Finland as a modern country. And so over to you, Danny. Danny is as an ex-academic, Danny is a politically engaged academic. It is so welcome. He doesn't believe that, he only speaks, objective truths or something. He's got a point of view, and that's very valuable right now, for example, in this world. So Danny, over to you. Tell us 10 minutes, a briefer on Finland.
Thank you very much, Alan. My job, I'm the warm-up act, and my job is I think, to try to explain what is unusual about Finland, but also what is unusual about us in the UK. I've written a lot of books about the UK, a lot of books about inequality, and a lot of books about how terrible things are in the UK. And it was partly because of that I decided, along with my colleague Untitled Chapter, to write a book about that country in Europe which did best at almost everything, rather than the country which often is at the bottom of league tables, which is the UK. We are, along with Bulgaria, the most economically unequal country in Europe, for instance. Finland ranks first, second, or third on over 100 social statistics in international comparisons. There are other parts of Europe that do well, almost as well, and there are parts of countries that do well, but there's nowhere that does quite as well as Finland. And the reason for me telling you this is that whenever you talk about a country which is particularly equitable and particularly successful, people in that country don't like to talk about it. They tend to be shyer, bashful, and they'll also know all about the problems in their country. They'll say, but it's, we're still not succeeding in this in terms of poverty, and we've got so far to go in terms of climate change and other things. Whereas people from more unequal countries that fail, the UK is a great example. Think about Nigel Farage shouting his mouth off so much. People from more unequal countries are very willing to talk about how wonderful they think their country is. USA is another example. Let me just give you a few measures by which Finland does well. There's an appendix at the end of this book. The book is very thick because if you write a book with a co-author who's Finnish, they are very meticulous and want everything in it. The appendix goes on for page after page after page, but I'm just going to give you just over half a dozen. Most importantly, perhaps, for me, Finland has the lowest infant mortality rate in the world and the lowest infant mortality rate which has ever been achieved in the world. That is quite something, the lowest number of bereaved parents. If you're wondering about the UK, we currently rank about 16th, 17th, 18th in Europe. We are heading rapidly down the league table in Europe. Our infant mortality rate in recent years has actually been rising. Finland comes top of the OECD league table in terms of education. Its education system is so good that the results place it top no matter how you measure it. Finnish young people by the age of 16, 17 or 18 can speak multiple languages, but they're also very good at maths and very good at problem solving. And they carry on being good at these things. Whereas in a country like the UK, we have an education system designed to get people grades on a particular day so they can get a C or an A, but not necessarily teach them in a way in which they can still do what they were taught at school a few years later. I was just going through how Finland does well in many, many things. But some of you may not expect. It's ranked the best country for business in the world. There is the highest trust in the police in Finland of all EU countries. The police are trusted more in Finland than anywhere else in the EU. There's highest trust in other people, in all Europeans. Finland has, by various measures, the least organised crime in the world. It's the most stable country in the world, and also the country which is most free. And it has the lowest economic inequality as measured by income. Now, it is not, of course, just PR that got Finland there, because Finland ranks so far ahead of other countries, all of which have PR. But without PR, it would almost certainly have been impossible. And it's relatively easy to say that because there are very few countries that call themselves democratic in the world that don't have PR. In fact, most Europeans, I think, don't know what it is like not to have PR. The main OECD countries without PR are the United States, the UK, and Singapore. These also happen to be the three most economically unequal countries in the OECD. We don't have a democratic system. I won't even mention or go into the House of Lords. But the House of Commons, the way it works, is that only about 10% of people live in constituencies where there's a chance that your vote can matter. And the more progressive parties, the Greens and Labour and so on, votes are incredibly well split. Whereas the Liberals versus the Conservatives vote generally are not that well split under our first past the post system. So why, if it's so obvious that you need PR to be able to get progressive politics, it allows you to have parties which are quite daring. They're often quite small. You can have a mainstream social democratic party where if you don't get on with what it's doing, you can have another one. The Greens don't take away huge numbers of votes from other parties, so don't tip the balance so that the Conservatives wins. If it's so obvious, why doesn't the left in Britain get it? And I think this is a really interesting question. For a few years, I harboured a kind of fantasy that one thing that was going on in Britain was that the left and progressive were being infiltrated by, say, MI6 or MI5 or whatever, with agents designed or programmed to argue against things like PR and make sure that it keeps on self-destructing. But I'm afraid my actual conclusion I've come to is a bit worse than that. In very unequal countries with poor politics, which is what you get from a political system that we have, it isn't just that the right is able to dominate and control it so well. Your left disintegrates and begins to argue amongst itself, doesn't form coalitions which actually work and so on. If you're thinking, by the way, that PR would help the Liberal Party in particular in Britain, well, if you look across Europe, there's a Liberal bloc in the European Parliament, and it's the smallest. You don't get enormous numbers of Liberals by having PR. You actually get quite a lot of Liberal voting by not having PR. So why don't we get it? Why do we have this mistrust? Part of the reason is that we find ourselves arguing amongst ourselves. Because we don't tend to mix very, very much socially, we're much more likely to know people who say want to vote for the Green Party or want to vote for the Trade Union Alliance or believe that somebody should be a leader of the Labour Party rather than somebody else and argue with them, rather than knowing people on the other side, less progressive side of politics, and realising what they're actually into and what they're trying to get. In countries, European countries with PR, which is all of them, apart from us, progressive parties end up working together in power, actually having to get things done. Finland is the extreme example of this, with 5 parties working together in power. It also moves your entire politics in a particular direction. The last time I was in Finland, I interviewed a Conservative mayor of a town. And the politics of the Conservative mayor, other than the fact he quite liked conscription and the army, but other than that, the politics of the Conservative mayor were to the left of Jeremy Corbyn. But Finland is not that much of an exception in Europe. If you think about German politics, if you think about Merkel and refugees, or the level of public spending in Germany, which is higher than what Jeremy Corbyn proposed in 2019, you can see that PR moves or can move your politics to a more progressive side in general. But we don't get it. It's really odd. John McDonnell was in favour of PR, but Jeremy Corbyn was not in favour of PR. We kind of harbour, for some reason, in this country, and I suspect a few people in the US do, some kind of fantasy of a revolution of the purist party with the perfect politics, which will only get its manifesto, if only it gets its manifesto right, that 15,000 word document, and presents it to the people. Suddenly they will flood over and decide in their millions to elect the great leader and enact the revolution. That is not what has happened in those European countries that have what we can only dream of actually having. I think it's a relatively simple thing to make the case for. There isn't an example in the world of a country that doesn't have PR that does well in terms of progressive politics. How you get it is interesting, but we're at a point where the Labour Party and Liberal Party are talking to each other at the moment over it, and I think it would be terrible if people on the left of Labour were to try to argue against this actually happening. I'm almost at the end of my 10 minutes, so I should wrap up. But just to kind of give you an idea of the differences, and not just Finland. Finland excels at this. But in the mainland of Europe, you're charged almost nothing to go to university. Access is free. Whereas here we have £9,000 a year fees. You have train systems that work, that go on time, which are run by national governments. You have health spending far, far higher than our health spending. In Finland, for all social groups, the freedom to choose when you work is higher than in any other country in Europe. There's flexibility over labour. Housing is better sorted out in the rest of Europe than in this country. It's cheaper, of higher quality. Homelessness is lowest in Finland. I could go on and on and on, but to get there, to achieve this, people with progressive politics have to work together, and they can't work together under the system that Dominic Cummings loves so much, which is the first past the post system in Britain. You really, really need to stop supporting first past the post and to support PR, and not worry too much about what form of PR it is. Once you've got PR, then you've got power for people, and they can improve whatever it is you get. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
great introduction, Danny. That's just really lovely. So now we're going to turn, and please get your questions ready. Questions, please, for either Danny or Dan Koivulaasko, I hope I pronounced that right, who is the Vice Minister of Education in Finland. I think that's a pretty good gig, you know, to get a job as the Vice Minister of Education in the world's best educational system. You'd like that job, wouldn't you, Danny? Okay, so Dan, tell us, first of all now, and welcome from Helsinki, tell us a bit about yourself. Give us a short political biography about how you got into politics and what you do now as the education vice minister in the 5-party, all led by women, can't be stressed enough, parties that run the government of Finland. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. I'm shortly or briefly just something about my background. I guess I could kind of one career as a good all-around activist in various and numerous social movements while at the university, and I was studying social anthropology and a lot of anti-racism work, and that basically started because we were working a lot with helping undocumented migrants and such. So then we had to start looking out for the populist right as well, and these kinds of things. That's kind of one background I have. Then I've been elected member of Helsinki City Council for previously for 8 years, and chairman of the audit committee of Helsinki, overseeing the finances in the city of Helsinki, the capital. So I was doing that for some time then, and actually about the same time I was working for a big trade union here in Finland, and then now, since we have entered this coalition government, Left Alliance, I have worked first as chief of cabinet for the education minister, and now I have, since last summer, I've worked as my title in Finnish is actually state secretary, but that's a title you don't have in most countries. So this kind of filling in for our minister in international affairs and in intra-ministerial affairs is what I actually do at the Ministry of Education and in the different ministerial working groups we have for cabinet. I think thank you, Danny, for your presentation. Also, I could easily get involved in kind of building momentum for in describing how we managed to overturn the previous right-wing government and the balance of power shifted in the 2019 election and opened up a possibility for having this center-left coalition we have now. But I guess I won't go into that as much. But I will say that in Finland we have a very strong background or tradition of broad governmental coalitions. There for a long time in Finland there was 4 big parties, where the Center Party, the Social Democratic Party, and our predecessor, the Democratic League, was formed a lot of governments when the welfare state of Finland was being built, and also since Finland's joined the EU and later on we've had even broader coalitions. It was a 6-party coalition that we had in 2011. Last time my party, the Left Alliance, was in government, and this Left Alliance, as Alan said in the beginning, we have a popular support of about 8% currently, and the 16 out of 200 seats. But that has given us two posts in cabinet, and I mentioned kind of the shift of balance of power from what we had previously, the previous government, which was the kind of the most right-wing coalition that you could build from Finnish parliament. And now we have basically, well, one party is the same, but it's basically the most kind of left-leaning coalition that you can build from Finnish parliamentary base, and that just shows you that there is well, a lot of space for political compromise and negotiation, which is something that we've been able to do based on the trust in society, which Danny also referred to, that is quite high.
Great. And we should just also add that the leader of the Left Alliance, Lee Anderson, is in fact the Minister of Education and, in a sense, Dan's boss. Now, Dan, tell us.
Yeah, my boss.
Dan, tell us, you're now working as State Secretary, Vice Minister of Education. Just give us an example. When we were chatting last week, I found it very interesting. So what kind of things is the left doing in education in Finland?
Okay, yeah, thanks for asking. We've had well, not only in the educational sector, but specifically in the educational sector, we have kind of managed to do two big things during this government term. The first is that although we've had a very good educational system, there has been cutbacks in the education sector for a long period of time over the last couple of governments. So we've managed to turn this around and gone back to the path of increasing educational expenditure, which is something that is really important for us. We have also kind of student psychosocial counseling and this kind of project regarding educational equality have been at the center of this government. So we've had a lot of focus on that. Sadly, they're not all permanent projects, but we're able to do them during this government. And then the big reform is something that both our party and also the Social Democratic Party have been pushing for 20 or so years, and that is to increase the age of leaving school. So basically, in Finland, up until now, it's been voluntary to after 9th grade to attend education. Now we've managed to put forward the bill, which first puts the compulsory age at 18, and that essentially is 12 years of school. And that's not, of course, only meant to be something new that you have to do, but this also gives the local municipalities, which are in charge of organizing the education, it makes them responsible for seeing it that everybody has a place to study at, and also this means further kind of subsidies for school material, which previously have been relatively expensive in some vocational trainings, or then on the other hand, the school books and the secondary schools have been quite expensive. So these are all free nowadays because of this new reform. But what it's doing to the general level of education, it is aimed at kind of increasing the overall level of education in Finnish society, and so it sets the new norm basically.
Right. Okay. Now let's just go back a little bit in your political history. Why did you, some years ago, I know you've been a Left Alliance members, why did you choose the Left Alliance Party to join? There is others. You could have joined the Social Democratic Party, which is bigger than the Left Alliance. Why did you choose the Left Alliance?
Well, I guess when I was joining the youth league of the left when I was joining, so that was the only kind of it's an independent organization, and I used to be chairman of the Left Youth in Finland actually before my boss, who has also been chair of Left Youth, and basically in the early 2000s and so on, it was one of it was the most active youth organization in Finland, like political youth organization, and it had a strong presence in close to social movements and demonstrations and such, so there was really never any other choice for me in terms of a party, because that was the only one that was present in the only one that has strong ties to trade unionism and like socialism, basically. I mean, the Greens were in some social movements, of course, very present, but this trade unionist background and the party history and its background is for me the legacy of my part, or the predecessor of my party, as also being involved in building the Finnish welfare state was something that I was really interested in.
Great. Okay. And thank you for these questions coming in. Just keep them coming. I've noticed some number. I'm sure Steve's noting them as well. Now let's get into the Finnish election system. Now we don't want a half an hour on this subject and make it too technical, because it can get quite kind of geeky when you get into it. But we've already said Left Alliance got 8% of the vote, 8% of the seats. Boy, that's just, it's hard to sort of take that in. And you don't know what it's like under first past the post then. So give us a little bit of how the Finnish proportional representation voting system works. Like, what's the ballot look like? How many candidates? How many constituency? Give us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I'll use the city of Helsinki, which is the only city that makes up a full kind of electoral district. Otherwise, it's bigger regional areas. But the city of Helsinki, we get 22 MPs. That's like a little bit over 10% of the MPs, and it's quite strongly, quite evenly based on population. I mean, it can only come from this rounding of numbers, that some area is more or less represented, or has. I mean, the number of MPs is directly linked to the population of the area. And so we have 22 MPs in Helsinki, and we use this Dhont system, and it's a fully open list. So some would describe it as the kind of like most open list system, together with, I think, Latvia and maybe some elections in Brazil. But it means that the candidates in an election in Helsinki, each political party that sets up candidates or nominates candidates can nominate the same number of candidates as there is available seats. So that means that a full list for an individual party is the 22 members that are 22 candidates that can then be chosen from. And basically they're not ranked. The party doesn't rank their candidates, so it's only based on personal vote that the individual candidates are then put in order on the lists, first party internally, and then there's the comparison done between the parties. And basically here I mean, I don't want to mix things up by using winner takes it all, but basically the person who has the most votes in an individual party, let's say somebody gets 1,000 votes and that's the most, well, then they wouldn't get elected at all. But basically they get the full amount of votes that party has gotten as their comparison number. So the first one in each party gets all of their party's votes as a comparison number. Then the second one gets half of that vote. The third gets 1/3. The fourth gets 1/4. The fifth gets 1/5, and so on. And then these comparison numbers are put in order, and that determines the number of elected or MPs that each party gets. And it's the same system also in local elections, basically, but the number of candidates is different than depending on which elections and which districts and so on. But according to this system, then we got, for example, three MPs from Helsinki as our support in the capital is stronger than our national average.
Right. And
I hope it wasn't too technical.
no, that's good. I mean, we start to get a sense that smaller parties like the Left Alliance, it really makes sense to vote for Left Alliance because you got a chance that you might, in fact, actually get an MP from your party. Whereas in this country, you vote for the Green Party, for example, we have 650 constituencies, and 649 of them, it really doesn't matter. The Greens don't have a chance. And it's been that way for the last 12 years. I mean, voting for these smaller parties is in many times a simple wasted vote. Whereas in Finland, you can have a vote for who you want to, and that vote is going to count. Your person may not necessarily win, but it's going to be part of the calculations. Now, and that's quite important, I think, about in a closed list, it is the party that decides the order of the candidates. But in an open list, it's the voters who decide who's going to go through and who isn't. Now, supporters of the UK voting system say that under PR, MPs and their voters lose touch with each other. You don't know who your MP is, you don't know how to contact them, etc. It would just be terrible, I mean, because what they have in, I think it's a 12 or 13 constituencies, big decked areas, and all across the country. My son lives in Finland, up country. He has one, Helsinki, etc. How do people contact their MPs in Helsinki or any part of the country? Do they know who they are?
I would say we have, on a general level, we have very kind of like low hierarchy in Finnish society. So people most definitely know their MPs if they want to know their MP. I mean, because you can meet your MP on the metro or on the tram or so, but that's been something that, like, having a very open society which has low level of hierarchy means that it's indeed not that difficult to get to know your MP should you be interested. I think there's numerous kind of market square meetings that all parties and all popular politicians participate in. A lot of parties do it more closer to elections. We try to do it all year round so that our voters can always come and meet us, and general population can always come and meet us. I would say one thing that, or one factor that I find very important. I mean, there you can make the case or the argument for having closed lists, and I see some benefits in that as well, because that kind of gives kind of a more formal role for parties as democratic structures if they determine the role on, or the position on the list. But what is good in this system that we have is that it enables party internal competition. I mean, of course, you need money for campaigning and such, but still, as it's generally open, I find it quite democratic that, like, anybody who gets nominated then has 0 votes when you start the campaign, basically, and it's not easy. Of course, a sitting MP has a great advantage, but you can also challenge sitting MPs in your own party, and that kind of keeps the parties also active, and that keeps the MPs campaigning, and this helps also the general public to meet their MPs.
Right. I think it also, one of the advantages is, let's say you're a Green voter in Helsinki, then there would be at least one Green MP in Helsinki, probably more than one. You see,
there's plenty.
Yeah. But see, the problem is, I live in Sheffield. You're a Green voter. There's no Green MPs in the Sheffield area. There's no Green MPs in London, and so, I mean, can you imagine having Priti Patel? You haven't heard of her, but Priti Patel is the person who's the Home Secretary here. Could you imagine Priti Patel was your MP and you want to make a complaint about the immigration policies? There's no one she's the only person, and she's really very, very bad and she's a minister, she's your MP. You can't consult people in your own party. You know, that seems to me a real big advantage of multi-member constituencies, that you can go, understandably, to an MP for your own party. And then they will give you obviously a more sympathetic hearing. Now, I saw Peter Crook just raised the question about the right wing, and we have to get into this question now. And I know you've had some in your earlier years, some experience in this. It can happen that the far right can gain quite a lot of votes under PR. There's no point to deny. It's not necessarily true, but it could happen. In Finland, there's a party. They used to be called the True Finns. You sort of know what they stand for. They are the second largest party, and they have 39 seats. That's a lot of seats because the Social Democrats, the leading party, have only 40. What's happened is the Social Democrats have worked with the Greens, the Left Alliance, and two other parties to form a coalition. But you know as well as I do, much better than I do, Dan, the far right does have an electoral presence in Finland, which they wouldn't necessarily have. They might, but not necessarily have. Here, they tend to join the Conservative Party. But anyways, why are the Finns quite strong? What is their program? What are the demographics of their base? And tell us your experience confronting politically the Finns, because you see, the view here in this country is the way we'll keep out right-wingers like UKIP is by our voting system. That just makes sure their votes don't count, where their votes do count under PR. So tell us about the Finns.
Well, yeah, first I have to say I had to check. I couldn't remember how many MPs the Greens have in Helsinki, but they have 6. So,
right.
So they're in European elections, they have been the biggest party of Helsinki, but just a minor detail now in this thing. Yeah, so the Finns have been a big party since 2011, the Euro crisis. It was a right-wing populist party under a kind of, back then, for a long time, quite a charismatic leader who had built his party for ever since 1995. He had built the party for a very long time, and then at some point he started including more vocal, as they say, anti-immigrant, or as I would say, racist, in their on their party lists and so on. And they really made it big in 2011. And then there was actually one of the reasons there was a very broad coalition formed in 2011, which also we were involved in, and the Greens and the Social Democrats and the coalition party of Finland. So that's basically having like Labour and the Tories in the same government. It was those two parties, and then also a smaller Swedish People's Party, which is now also in government. There was that was basically formed to hinder, or one perspective at least for our former party secretary's vote, that was one of the reasons to form that coalition, was to hinder their path to government. Then personally, I don't know if that is true. It's difficult to tell retrospectively, but nevertheless they were in opposition, but they still managed to grow even more in opposition, and there has been numerous scandals on their sayings over the years, but nevertheless they entered government in 2015, then after the second victorious election, the Finns, and then the party split in two while in government, and that has happened in Finland previously also, that there has been a populist party. It was a rural party in the 70s that has risen, and then it has basically kind of normalized as a party when in government. And that's something that then, well, one could argue that in a coalition government where they're not necessarily very skilled in the kind of profession of politics. I mean, there are of course moral issues to take into account here, and I was appalled by some of their policies when they were in government, but I don't think that excluding anyone from elections is the right way. If you have these sentiments in society, it also affects other parties, as we have seen around these debates on identity politics over the recent years. And I don't see it hindering anyone from running to be or being eligible to be elected, to having a real chance at getting elected. I don't see how you could improve society in that way. So I don't see this as something that is relevant for us, at least, to discuss in regard to the electoral system. I see it as a challenge to the rest of us to engage more people in our policies and actively work for the values we stand for. Well, yeah, the discussion climate has become quite harsh and over the years, and that's definitely something they have been responsible for, the Finns, but I think also some of the reactions to them have enabled their growth, and this is I don't know, I think this becomes a quite in-depth discussion about them if we go into this in more depth, but generally I think that you cannot kind of win them by not having them at the polls. You have to win them by winning the election.
Right. Yeah. I mean, people may know in the 2015 election in this country, UKIP got 13% of the vote, but only got one MP out of 650. I mean, you know, that just, and then of course the next year we had Brexit, and they certainly got the revenge on that one. Okay, now
that's a good example, I think, of what I was trying to say, that you don't make their policies go away by not having them elected.
Exactly. This is a question a bit that Sean Hagan just asked. Can you tell us a little bit about the relations between the Left Alliance and the Social Democratic Party? And what's like the role of the Left Alliance? I heard, like, for example, you've got a very good newspaper, Matti Konen, who was one of the people who helped set this up, said it's like a leading voice is the Left Alliance paper. So tell us, what is sort of the role of the Left Alliance in the coalition government? How do things go between you?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I have to go a bit further back to kind of initiate my answer, and I would say that, I mean, we used to be, the predecessor of Left Alliance was a really big party. It was like the biggest party after World War II for on a couple of occasions, and we had like a more than 20% popular support for a few decades back then, and so on. So we were one of the bigs previously. Ever since the 70s, the party support has declined to around where we are now, and there hasn't for a long time been a discussion of us as growing to become a bigger party than the Social Dems. But I think if we are successful, they kind of we keep them to the left more, because there's of course forming of coalitions, as I mentioned earlier, and when we are successful, then they make more left-leaning policy. One aspect of our relation is that, unlike in, for example, Sweden, which is our neighbor Sweden, where the trade union movement is completely dominated by Social Democrats, we have a very strong left presence in the trade union movement. So whereas in governments usually, or in municipalities and local government level, we have very good cooperation with social democratic politicians in most questions. We are used to having bigger sometimes differences within kind of trade union policies, but otherwise we have very good relations, I would say, to the party, and especially now in government we have managed to work very effectively together. And I think one example to prove my point is that our party, the Left Alliance voters, have been the most content with government out of all coalition partners, supporters.
Right. Okay. Last question.
Sure.
Speaking of coalitions, PR often can lead to coalition governments. Some supporters of the current voting system in this country says, coalition, that's just weak and ineffective governments. We don't want coalitions. We want strong ones like Boris Johnson and real strong party to run the country. Is that the experience of Finland? Is there something sort of weak and sort of not capable by coalitions?
Well, I would look at how different countries handled COVID, for example. Finland did really well on all measures, where even though we didn't put the harshest restrictions in place, we worked really effectively in taking into use these emergency measures and such, which were effective but not necessarily the harshest. And of course, you might argue with demographic factors and such, but still, Finland was really effective in containing the COVID pandemic, and at the same time, Finland's level of debts compared to other countries or other relevant countries that we usually compare to rose less. So basically, we took less debt to contain the pandemic. We're more efficient than many of the similar countries, the Nordics or North European countries, and then we did it on less money. So I guess that shows something of an effective government working. Great. And also, of course, local and regional health authorities and the general, states apparatus and public sector apparatus.
Finland is very much a decentralized country. Like, local governments are important. They're not very important in this country. And I bet you didn't have the scandals over COVID as we had, 150,000 deaths. It's been quite terrible. That's a good example. I think that's been very interesting, Dan. I see there's a whole bunch of questions to come. And I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Steve Pitchford, who's going to now call out people to ask their questions, either to Danny or to Dan. So, Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Dan. I've got a range of questions here. I'm just going to quickly give a quick picture to Dan and Danny so that they can see what's coming. There's a few around how PR affects the right wing and what their counter strategies are. There's a few about how the adoption of the long-established role of PR in Finnish elections is a representative of society and education, which is a really fascinating one. And there's some others on aspects of British society and impediments and potential strategies for going and doing PR. On that, the first question is from Susan Ackroyd, who's very keen to have hers asked. It seems to be a lovely one to kick things off. Susan, would you like to read your question out? Or would you like to me to read it and you to come up with a follow-up? in order to keep things going, I'll read Susan's question out. Susan observes that one of the problems of the UK is that some of the electorate don't seem to care very much about enhancing the country. To some degree, they see, and I'm paraphrasing Susan's comment, a degree of almost social justice in a weird sort of sense in terms of the inequality and the haphazardness of the system. And Susan agrees that with Danny about the sense of mistrust. Susan asks, how do we encourage the electorate to really want to improve the country enabled by PR rather than almost this current lottery and gamble that's the current system delivers?
Shall I have a go at that first?
Yeah.
Okay. I think our current voting system builds mistrust in that, you know, you first vote when you're 18, 19 or 20, and then you discover in most cases, most people who vote do not get what they vote for. The person they vote for doesn't win. And that quickly builds into apathy. So majority of working class people don't even bother to vote in Britain. And if you knew that your vote actually counted, that it would actually have an effect how you voted, trust would be higher. However, I will say something for the population and its sentiment. And the reason for saying this is I did a book on Brexit a few years ago with my friend Sally Tomlinson, and then went round and did 100 talks in Brexit leaving areas of the south of England, where places where the majority of the population voted to leave. And the one thing I learned doing that was that a majority of the elderly people, largely elderly, who turned up to these talks, who'd voted to leave because they thought it was the best option for their grandchildren. They were worried that their grandchildren would never be able to buy a house, couldn't get a career, and they were told that if they voted leave, things would be better. So I don't think people were voting leave or voting Conservative necessarily out of vindictiveness or because they think a few people deserve most and most people don't. But it's easier to fool people in a country like Britain because your dominant powers stay in for longer. Hardly anybody in Britain knows that the Conservative Party in 2014 left the European bloc in the EU and joined a bloc to the far right with the Free Finns in it and Alternative for Deutschland from Germany. And our Conservative Party became a far right European party in 2014. We just don't know these things. So when people say PR will let the far right in, the far right are in now.
Lovely answer. I don't know if you want to talk on that, Dan, about this country. Do you?
I thought that was a really good answer. I don't have really anything to add to this.
Okay, Steve, next question.
Super. So going on from there, it links in quite nicely with some of the points as Rick says that he's a huge fan of the Finnish educational system. And he questions if the UK system is actually the source of many of its problems. I guess linked into that, Dan, is to what extent is the electoral system and civic duty part of the Finnish electoral system?
Education system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure I got the question, but are you asking about like how much we have civic education in the school system, or? Okay, yeah. So my party traditionally considers that we should have a lot more, and this especially in regard to vocational training, where the general topics, where you have less of the general topics than in the secondary school and in the high school. I don't know how I should kind of make the difference. They're both secondary schools, but like in the high school and not in the vocational training. But I guess we have we have it as well part of history teaching, and so as I'm not that familiar with the UK system, I can't really make a comparison. But
Can I
could
just,
be could be added, but there's, I guess, a
Can
lot of it
I just want to
in the
jump,
curriculum.
as I heard that in Finland, in the educational system, that there's been in the last few years quite a lot of emphasis on like media literacy, teaching people like how to separate real stuff from fake news. Do you know anything about that? Like that is a kind of civic education where you teach people how to read the media, how to look at social media. Can you tell us anything about that? Because that will obviously help to build a more educated electorate.
Yeah, I'd have to prepare a little bit presentation kind of if you would like me to go into detail on this. But yeah, you're absolutely right that there's been a strong emphasis on this in recent years, and starting from, I mean, I don't want to give a all optimistic picture of everything. We're really worried about reading in general, how how little people read on average these days, and so we have campaigns to encourage kids to read and kids being read to, and also then for a little older ones there's this media literacy campaigns, and that has been going on ever since I was in school. So yes, right. You're absolutely right, but not prepared to go into detail on the curriculum.
Yeah. Next question, Steve.
So we've had a couple on the history of PR in Finland. I'm right in thinking, this is just a quick nod, that since its establishment as a state, Finland has had PR, only ever known PR. Just a quick nod, unless I've fundamentally mistaken there, would be great. But the following question, I think this links into something that Peter's been asking in terms of part of the right wing response to PR. Peter, do you want to ask your follow-on question for how the right?
Yeah, I'm fine to do that. The question I shall read, because I can waffle like the best of you. Please, most particularly, do the major right-wing parties in Finland, this is for Dan, agree with and accept the PR system? And do they work together in opposition? I assume there is a sort of opposition of some sort. I don't know how the system works. So there's two questions, really.
Yeah, I think there hasn't been a serious debate for as long as I can remember on having any other electoral system. Nobody has proposed us changing the system, or no party has. I mean, some parties have more. For example, we had a pirate party here a while ago that tried to run for parliament but didn't get elected. But the discussion on developing democracy in Finland has been more about having more kind of general referendums, or having kind of like civic assemblies and participatory democracy and these kind of things. There's not really, to my knowledge, debate on changing of this, except for maybe some parties, or not maybe, but some parties have been campaigning to allow 16-year-olds to vote, to have people get engaged in voting on a younger age, and to then kind of be kind of linked to the system from a younger age, and thus voting, because there is a strong correlation on if you vote in your first election with if you vote again or not.
Right.
Thank you. Clearly, they accept it.
Yeah, definitely.
Steve?
Yep. Oh.
I was going to say, did I miss? There was one question on the how have we always had this kind of PR voting system, but basically, at least like in independent Finland, it's been the same. There's been changes in in how, I mean, the voting law that we have now is I'd have to look it up which year it's from, but this nominating of candidates and such was a little bit different previously, but basically, to my knowledge, I mean, it's been like this for a very long time.
Danny, do you want to jump in at all?
No, I thought it was lovely talking about the campaigns about reading in Finland. And this is my experience of, you know, one reason that countries do well is that they're not complacent and they're really worried about things, even though they do well. So while you were speaking about the reading, I was thinking about the statistics about in which country are more library books taken out than any other and read to children, and it's Finland. But you're worrying about that. Whereas in this country, you know, we don't worry about our libraries closing down. And as long as a certain proportion of the population get to see it English, that's okay. But it's almost as if we don't particularly want a population too well educated, because we never know what they might do if you were to give them a chance. So that's my chipping in.
Okay, good to chip in. Steve.
Yeah, cracking question. I think Sean Hagan, it'd be could go next. 7:45. Sean, you're asking about the cooperation and agreements around it
Between the parties in the coalition.
Am I unmuted? I can't remember exactly what my...
Go for it, man.
Right. Well, basically, you've got a 5-party coalition in Finland. I'm just going from memory of what I actually asked. How do you actually mediate and resolve any ideological or policy differences within that coalition without threatening the integrity of the coalition? And how did you actually negotiate the coalition agreement when you form the government, and how would you go about agreeing any necessary policy adjustments along the way, given the fact that you've got a 5-party coalition, which is something we can even only dream about in the UK?
That's an excellent question, Sean. Excellent. That's the nuts and bolts. How does the government work?
Basically,
that's indeed a very good question. I'll start with the coalition negotiations where we wrote the government program. It was well, it took about, I'd say, over a month. We had about 20 some different working groups that was being coordinated by this the party leaders and their advisors, and then they had kind of like subgroups writing chapters on different themes based on this working model that had been put together by both the Prime Minister's office, like civil servants there, and just like processually, and then of course it was led by the then Prime Minister to be, who then actually resigned before our current Prime Minister. We've had a change of Prime Minister during this government period.
During the actual negotiations, was that?
No, that was afterwards. That was afterwards.
Oh, right.
That was about. He was Prime Minister for a while, and then we changed. Then
okay.
There was a change. Let's not get into that now, because it would be difficult to describe on kind of briefly of what it was about. But basically, how these grievances or kind of potential conflicts are avoided. Are avoided is well, of course you cannot always avoid them, and then you have parties going at each other in media, but the integrity has so far not been too compromised. At least there's been a few crises during funding negotiations or budget negotiations, but basically, depending on if it's a principally serious argument, then you'd have it to the kind of chiefs of cabinet for the different party groups to negotiate, and they have kind of a weekly meeting where they go over things, or then of course to party leaders, like finally if you have to take it all the way there. But there's kind of a numerous different levels between advisors, between ministers, and then usually these things are tried to, or I mean, the negotiations take a long time, and that's just price you have to pay for it to have a coalition government like this working. I guess that's the best answer I can give. That you just have to have a lot of time for the negotiations.
Can I ask quite a kind of the moment question? It's about the war in Ukraine. That we all know that, hopefully we know, that Finland has a very long, I think it's about 1,300 kilometer border with Russia. My own son lives in Finland. We've been talking about this. This is obviously an issue that is of worry to the people of Finland. You know, what's going to happen? How, for example, would the coalition government, and I'm sure there's, you know, some people say join NATO, some people say, no, we don't want to join NATO, etc. How would a question like that get debated and finally decided by the government? I saw an interview with the foreign minister of Finland on TV on the weekend. How would something like that be discussed and debated?
This is also a very, very good question. Well, when we talk about issues like this, Finland traditionally had a very strong president. I mean, the president's office had the president had like very broad mandate, and also in national policy. Since the new constitution was established, the president doesn't have a role in domestic policy, but he still is head of foreign policy. So here it's not only government, but it's also the president's office that has a big role in this. But right now, well, Finland is in the process of well, I don't know what the correct term in English would be, but like we are delivering a paper to Parliament on this, and then this is prepared in the ministries and also in the kind of jointly with the president's office, and then there will be a big parliamentary debate about how the current affairs in Ukraine affect Finland.
Yeah,
Finland, and
right.
this will be it's kind of like a, how should I say, this is words you don't use in everyday life. So this how it's called in English, I don't know, but basically there will be a big parliamentary debate based on a paper submitted by government, and that will take place in a few weeks.
Right.
And the speaker of the parliament has had a role in kind of initiating this process.
Right. Okay, Steve or Danny, did you want to jump in?
I'll just jump in to remind people of the kind of farcical situation in the UK with coalitions. When the 2010 election result was released, the cabinet secretary told the parties they had to come to an agreement over the weekend or there would be a run on the pound. And that was when the Liberals abandoned their policy about universities and joined the Conservatives over the weekend. So no time discussing things at all. In 2015, David Cameron had a commitment for a vote on Brexit because he assumed there's no way he was going to get an absolute majority. And he'd carry on the coalition government with Liberals, and he wouldn't have had to have a Brexit vote. But of course, our voting system gave him an absolute majority. So it's a completely different system. And when people talk about debating in Finland in Parliament, they actually mean debating. It's not what happens in the British Parliament. The other thing well worth saying, and it's not perfect, but one thing that staggered me the most about politics in Finland was how so many politicians resign the minute they do something even slightly wrong. And I cannot remember the last time a British politician actually resigned on principle, even when they're found out having done something wrong. So it's a different, your society changes. You take that for granted. You still have politics and arguments, and you say the right are terrible, and we're moving things. But we take it for granted that our politicians will lie and will not resign. In Finland, they take it for granted that a politician will resign if they're found out. And it's those kind of things that are the real achievements. And that allows you to get to this point of then pushing and saying, how can we do other things which are on the frontier of politics in Europe?
Right. We are now sort of starting to come down on time. We've been going for an hour and 20 minutes here. Steve, maybe you can sort of get ready to wrap us up.
Yeah, well, just a couple of quick questions first. We've got loads and loads and loads. One of the things that has been touched on, a lot has been partially touched on. I'm really sorry because there's been so many great questions. One that hasn't quite gone in is to do a little bit with perceived media bias. I think, to be generous to the media in UK politics, in particular, I think there's many on the left who feel that they don't even get a fair share of the voice, let alone the ballot box. To what degree is the situation different in terms of media bias in Finland, and in particular smears on left-wing candidates?
I don't know if Danny is better than me in making a comparison, but I can say I was actually going to say this already earlier. For example, if you're interested in some of the things I have referred to, starting from our one prime minister resigning or such, there is a very good national broadcasting in Finland, which is called yle.fi. And then when you type in /English, then you get it in English. So you can look up a lot of things that I've talked about on this site, and also that is my answer to the question, that besides having quite good kind of party funding to elected parties, and then there's like political media funding, so that in order to ensure kind of the whole spectrum of voices being heard in the media, there is funding for that. Of course, commercial media could be criticized for its perspectives, and I'm sure that could be done everywhere. But I think that there is. I mean, I'm again no expert on British media, but my general idea is that there's not. I mean, we're not always the most popular party in press, but we don't get severe smear campaigns unless there's a reason for it.
Right.
But I will say that the populist right and the identitarian or identity politicus, like right wing, is campaigning really strong against government media or the state-funded media, which they perceive as being left-leaning, which we don't agree. We think it's good journalism.
Danny, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I'd agree. Some of the nastiest media in Finland came in from abroad. So there were videos for the Free Finns, I assume made in the USA, if you looked at the production of it. So the right wing outside of Nordic countries is very interested in Nordic countries and tries to have an influence. But on those international measures, Finland comes out as having one of the freest press, the most accurate press. And the UK, out of about 30 countries, we are at the bottom of the league table for the accuracy of our press. And again, we get used to it, so we don't notice. If you take our supposedly most progressive national newspaper, The Guardian, it in effect campaigned against the Labour Party for half of 2019 and would rather have or help contribute towards an 80-seat Conservative majority. And that's the progressive Guardian newspaper, which we think of as progressive because we have almost nothing else.
Right. Right. Okay, a couple more questions and then we should wrap it up.
Great. So there's been one that's been a little bit of a theme through a few different questions. Let me just put my file. And that really is, I think Tom Brake summed it up very, very well. Unfortunately, not on the line at the moment. He asks, do you have any ideas on how we can convince people in here in the UK that the PR is a part of the solution in achieving the things they want: better health, better education? Over here, I think it's fair to say there is an incredible disconnect between the electoral system, which is seen as a boring, dull thing, and actual benefits to the citizens of the UK. How do we help people get the connect between a better system and better policies? And I think that's maybe a nice one to finish off with both, Alan.
Danny?
Yeah, I'll go first on that. It's very tricky. I mean, countries do not alter their electoral systems easily or often. We still have a system that comes from the kind of rotten boroughs. You know, we made slight changes to it. Oxford and Cambridge University used to have seats. So 60 years ago, I would have had 2 votes as a member of Oxford University and a citizen of the city of Oxford. But other than that, we haven't changed it. It's hard to get over to people how much this matters and how different other countries are. Most people think that other European countries are like mini versions of Britain, you know, full of private schools and all the kind of things that actually don't largely exist elsewhere. I think the key one, to end on a slightly positive, if a bit Machiavellian note, it's really interesting to watch Keir Starmer at the moment and to watch the Liberals beginning to talk to each other. And Keir Starmer may be Machiavellian enough to realise that it is perpetual opposition unless he actually comes to a deal with Liberals and the Greens over what they're going to do at the next election. And part of that deal has to be a promise about PR. And so one of my reasons for wanting to talk at this was to say, I think it would be terrible if the progressive left of Labour, simply because it's something that Keir Starmer might do, decided, oh, that has to be bad if he's doing it. It might be the way in which you actually get something far better in the long run if it happens. It's convincing our politicians above all else, because until they're convinced, then it won't happen. And while you have gravy train seats and people think that they're safe forever, they won't change it. But the Labour Party's had a hell of a shock. And that shock and the idea of being out of power for practically ever and being a rump of a party means that now is a time when it's possible they may come to an agreement with the other parties, not campaign against each other. If they're really clever, they wouldn't put up candidates, but at least not campaign against each other, and then have a proper coalition deal, which involves the introduction of a form of PR before the subsequent election, were they to get into power.
Thanks, Danny. Dan, any tips from Finland?
I don't know if I have any tips, but I think what Dennis said is a really good way of summing up this discussion, and I don't have anything really to add to that. I'd like to thank you for the invitation. It's been really nice talking to you, and hopefully you got something out of this description on Finland that I was able to provide. And as I said, there is a lot of Finnish news in English also, or are a lot of Finnish news available in English also, and on the national broadcasting side, if there's and anything that should be of interest, and also a lot about basically how the elections were written about. You can look up from that
Love-
site, and there's a lot of articles also on these issues that we have discussed today.
We got a lot out of it. It was just great having Danny and Dan. I thought the format worked really well, really sort of reaching out across very different countries, England and the UK and Finland, but I thought it was a really lovely spirit of trying to learn from each other, etc. So thank you very much, Danny and Dan. It was really, really lovely, just really good. Now, Steve, why don't you end us by telling what's up next on April the 26th?
So April the 26th, we are going from previously Canada to Finland to somewhere a little closer to home, Wales, which is often unreported in UK news, but is really the heart of a new progressive movement of cooperation and PR in the UK. With the Senate has got some interesting reforms coming up. So we've got lined up a number of guests, with the last one to be confirmed. We're hoping to have with us Laura McAllister from the Institute of Public Policy in Cardiff University, Ben Lake, the Kerrigan, forgive for translation, I will practice that, MP for Plaid Cymru, and we have two members, hopefully from the Senedd, one of whom will be from Plaid, and hopefully we'll be able to get a Labour member confirmed in the next couple of days. So it should be a cracking session all about electoral reform and the progress of PR in Wales. Wales, for those who don't know, has got a move at the moment towards adopting PR for council elections via STV. A form of PR. So
right.
all exciting stuff.